this story, you'll learn how a seemingly harmless birthday gift revealed a devastating secret and changed a family's life forever. I'm John, a 42-year-old financial analyst living in the suburbs of New York. Our home is a typical two-story house in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where everyone knows each other and kids ride their bikes in the street. My wife, Emma, is 37 and works as a marketing manager. We have two children, Sarah, who's just turned 15, and James, who's 13. Our life seemed perfect, at least until Sarah's birthday this year. Sarah's birthday party was a small affair, just a few friends from school, some pizza, and a homemade cake. Her best friend, Amelia, brought her a DNA test kit as a gift. It was one of those trendy things teenagers are into these days. We all thought it was just a fun way to see if we had any surprising ancestry. "Wow, this is cool," Sarah exclaimed, holding up the kit. "Thanks, Amelia." Emma and I exchanged amused glances. "Go ahead, sweetheart," I said. "Let's see if we've got any hidden Viking blood." We didn't think much of it. Sarah sent off her sample the next day, and life continued as usual. I went to work, Emma handled her projects, and the kids went to school. It was just another week in our busy lives. A few weeks later, the results came in. It was a Tuesday evening, and I had just gotten home from work. Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table, her laptop open in front of her. She looked up as I walked in, her face pale. "Dad, can you come look at this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Sure, what's up?" I replied, walking over to her. She pointed to the screen. "These are my DNA results. It says you're not my biological father." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I sat down heavily in the chair next to her, staring at the screen. The words didn't make sense. How could I not be her father? "Emma," I called out, my voice tight. "Can you come here for a minute?" Emma came in from the living room, a concerned look on her face. "What is it?" Pointed to the laptop. "Look at this." She glanced at the screen and immediately went pale. "John, I can explain." "Explain what?" I asked, my voice rising. "What the hell is this, Emma?" "Mom, what's going on?" Sarah's voice was small and scared. Emma took a deep breath. "John, Sarah, there's something I need to tell you. Years ago, I made a mistake." "What kind of mistake?" demanded, my heart pounding in my chest. Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I had an affair, John. It was a long time ago, and I thought it was over." The room fell silent. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My wife, the woman I trusted with my life, had been unfaithful. And now, the proof was staring us all in the face. Sarah looked at me, her eyes wide with fear. "Dad, what does this mean? You're still my dad, right?" Reached out and took her hand, my own hands shaking. "Of course I am. This doesn't change anything between us, okay?" But inside, I felt like my world was falling apart. Emma's betrayal cut deep, and I didn't know how to process it. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the house was tense. Sarah was confused and scared, and James, who we hadn't told yet, sensed something was wrong. Finally, I decided we all needed to know the truth. I ordered DNA tests for Emma, James, and myself. The waiting period was excruciating. Every time I looked at Emma, I felt a mixture of anger and sadness. How could she have done this to us? When the results came in, they confirmed what we feared. Sarah was not my biological daughter. Emma and I sat the kids down to tell them the truth. James, Sarah, I began, my voice steady but firm. There's something we need to talk about. James looked confused. What's going on, Dad? Mom and I took a DNA test, I said. We found out that I'm not Sarah's biological father. James's eyes widened in shock. What? How is that possible? Emma took a deep breath. James, I made a mistake a long time ago. I had an affair and that's why. There was a heavy silence. James looked at Emma, then at me. Does this mean we're not a family anymore? No, it doesn't, I said quickly. We're still a family. We need to figure out how to move forward. Sarah started to cry. I'm so sorry, Dad. I didn't mean for this to happen. Pulled her into a hug. It's not your fault, Sarah. None of this is your fault. But as I held her, I knew that things would never be the same again. Our perfect family was shattered, and I didn't know how we were going to put the pieces back together. The days following the DNA results were a blur. I felt like I was sleepwalking through life, going through the motions without really being there. Emma moved into the guest room, and the tension in the house was thick enough to cut with a knife. I knew we had to talk about what had happened, but every time I looked at her, all I could see was betrayal. At work, I tried to focus, but my mind kept drifting back home. My boss, Dave, noticed. John, you seem out of it lately. Everything okay at home? He asked one afternoon. I forced a smile. Yeah, just some family stuff. It'll get better. Let me know if you need some time off, he offered. Family comes first. Thanks, Dave, I replied. Appreciated his concern, but I didn't think time off would solve anything. At home, things were just as bad. Sarah and James were struggling to understand what was going on. Sarah was quieter than usual, spending most of her time in her room. James, on the other hand, was angry. One evening, I found him in the living room, his fists clenched. James, do you want to talk? Asked, sitting down next to him. How could she do this to us? He blurted out. How could Mom lie like that? I sighed. I don't know, buddy. People make mistakes. Big ones sometimes. But she broke our family, he said, his voice shaking. I know. And it's going to take time to figure things out. But no matter what, we're still a family, I said, trying to reassure him. Emma tried to reach out to the kids, but they were both so hurt and confused. One evening, she came into the living room where I was sitting with Sarah and James. Can we talk? Emma asked, her voice trembling. Sarah and James exchanged looks, then nodded reluctantly. Look, I know I've hurt you all, Emma began, tears in her eyes. I made a terrible mistake, and I'm so sorry. I love you all so much, and I never wanted this to happen. Then why did you do it? Sarah asked quietly. Emma took a deep breath. I don't have a good answer. I was going through a tough time, and I made a selfish, stupid choice. But it doesn't change how much I love you. James crossed his arms, looking away. Sarah just stared at the floor. It was clear they weren't ready to forgive her. And honestly, neither was I. But I knew we had to try to find a way to move forward. A few days later, I called Emma's sister, Linda. I thought maybe she could help Emma, and maybe even talk to the kids. Hey, Linda, it's John, I said when she picked up. John, how are you holding up? She asked, her voice full of concern. It's been tough, I admitted. I was hoping you could talk to Emma. She's really struggling, and the kids are refusing to talk to her. I'll do what I can, Linda replied. But this is something you all need to work through together. Have you considered therapy? I have. I think it's time we give it a try, I said. Thanks, Linda. After hanging up, talked to Emma about therapy. She agreed it was a good idea, and we set up an appointment with a family therapist, Dr. Harris. Our first session was awkward and tense. Dr. Harris asked us to share our feelings, and it felt like opening an old wound. John, can you start? Dr. Harris asked gently. Took a deep breath. I'm angry. I feel betrayed, but I also feel lost because I don't know how to fix this. Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Harris said. Emma, how about you? I feel guilty, Emma admitted, tears streaming down her face. I hate what I've done to our family. I want to make things right, but I don't know how. Dr. Harris turned to the kids. Sarah, James, how are you both feeling? Sarah spoke first. I feel like it's my fault. If I hadn't taken that test, none of this would have happened. It's not your fault, Sarah, I said quickly. None of this is your fault. James was still angry. I don't see how talking is going to help. Mom lied to us. How do we get past that? Dr. Harris nodded. It's going to take time, James, but talking about it is the first step. The sessions were tough, and they often ended with more questions than answers. But I hoped that by facing our issues head-on, we could start to heal. At home, I tried to be there for the kids as much as possible. I knew they needed stability, and I wanted to give them that. One night, Sarah came to me while I was sitting in the living room. Dad, can I ask you something? She said hesitantly. Of course, sweetie. What's on your mind? Do you still love Mom? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I took a moment to think. I don't know, Sarah. Love the person I thought she was, but right now, just feel hurt and angry. It's going to take time to figure that out. Sarah nodded, looking relieved. Thanks for being honest, Dad. As the days went by, I focused on taking things one day at a time. The kids needed me, and I needed to be strong for them. It wasn't easy, but I knew we had to keep moving forward. We had to find a way to heal, even if it felt impossible at times. Life after the initial shock of the DNA results was a series of ups and downs. Our family therapy sessions with Dr. Harris continued, and while they were often painful, they started to bring some clarity. However, one of the biggest obstacles we faced was the question of forgiveness, whether we could ever truly forgive Emma for what she did. One evening, after a particularly tense therapy session, I found myself alone in the kitchen, staring at the cup of coffee I'd just poured. I felt exhausted, emotionally drained from trying to keep it together for the kids. Sarah and James were upstairs, and Emma was in the guest room. Emma walked into the kitchen quietly. John, can we talk? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She sat down across from me, her hands clasped together. I know you're angry, she said, and you have every right to be, but I need to know, is there any chance for us to work through this? I sighed, rubbing my temples. I don't know, Emma. I'm trying to be here for the kids, but it's hard to look at you and not feel betrayed. Tears welled up in her eyes. Understand. I don't want to lose our family. We already lost it, I said quietly. At least the way it used to be. Now we have to figure out what's next. The next day at work, I was distracted, thinking about our conversation. My coworker, Mike, noticed. Hey, John, you look like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders. Want to grab a coffee and talk about it? He suggested. We headed to the break room, and I told him a bit about what was going on without going into too much detail. "Man, that's tough," Mike said. "Have you thought about taking some time for yourself? Maybe get some space to clear your head?" "Have, but with the kids and work, it's hard to just step away," I replied. Mike nodded. "Just remember, you've got people who care about you. Don't hesitate to lean on them." That night, I decided to take Mike's advice in a way. Told Emma I needed some time to think and went for a long drive. As I drove, I thought about everything: our marriage, the kids, the betrayal. I pulled over at a quiet park and sat on a bench, trying to sort through my emotions. When I got back home, it was late. The house was quiet, and I found Sarah still awake, sitting on the couch with a book. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked, looking up. "Yeah, just needed some air," I said, sitting down next to her. "How are you holding up?" She shrugged. "I don't know. It's weird. Sometimes I feel like everything's normal, and then I remember, and it's not." "I know what you mean," I said, putting my arm around her, "but we'll get through this together." As days turned into weeks, I noticed that Sarah was trying extra hard to be perfect. Her grades, her chores, everything was immaculate. One evening, I decided to talk to her about it. "Sarah, can we talk for a minute?" I asked, sitting on the edge of her bed. "Sure, Dad. What's up?" she replied, looking a bit nervous. "I've noticed you've been working really hard on everything lately," I said gently. "You don't have to overdo it, you know." She looked down, fiddling with the hem of her shirt. I feel like I have to make up for everything. Like it's my fault." I shook my head. "It's not your fault, Sarah. None of this is. You don't have to prove anything to me or anyone else. Just be yourself." She hugged me tightly, and I felt a bit of the weight lift off my shoulders. We still had a long way to go, but moments like this gave me hope. Meanwhile, James was still struggling with his anger. One afternoon, I found him in the garage, angrily throwing a basketball against the wall. "James, can we talk?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. He stopped and turned to me, his face flushed. "What's there to talk about, Dad? Mom messed up, and now everything's ruined." "I know you're angry," I said, "and it's okay to feel that way, but holding on to that anger isn't going to help you." "What am I supposed to do then?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Let's find a way to channel that anger," I suggested. "Maybe we can hit the gym together or go for a run. Something to help you work through it." He nodded slowly. "Okay, maybe that'll help." As the weeks went on, we started to find a new rhythm. Therapy was still tough, but it was helping us communicate better. I noticed small changes: Sarah smiling more, James laughing at a joke. Emma and I were still distant, but we managed to be civil for the kids' sake. One night, after the kids were in bed, I sat down with Emma again. "I've been thinking," I said, "maybe we should take a break from therapy and just focus on being a family. Try to find some normalcy." Emma looked surprised but nodded. "I think that's a good idea. We need to remember why we're doing this." We decided to spend more time together as a family: game nights, movie nights, anything to rebuild some of the connections we'd lost. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. One evening, as we were all watching a movie together, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe we couldn't go back to the way things were, but we could find a new way forward. It would take time, and it wouldn't be easy, but for the sake of Sarah and James, I knew we had to try. As I watched the kids laughing at a silly scene in the movie, I realized that even though our family had been shattered, we still had the pieces. It was up to us to put them back together, one day at a time. Our new routine of family time and moments of normalcy started to form a semblance of stability. But the underlying tensions were still there, simmering just below the surface. I knew it was only a matter of time before we had to face them head-on. One Saturday morning, I woke up to the smell of pancakes. Sarah was in the kitchen, flipping pancakes while humming a tune. It was a welcome sight, a bit of brightness in our otherwise cloudy life. "Morning, sweetheart," I said, ruffling her hair as I poured myself a cup of coffee. "Morning, Dad," she replied with a smile. "I thought I'd make breakfast today." "Smells delicious," I said, taking a seat at the table. "Where's James?" "Still sleeping, I think," she said. "He's been staying up late playing video games." I made a mental note to talk to James about his screen time. Just as I was about to take a bite of my pancake, Emma walked into the kitchen. There was an awkward silence before she spoke. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning," Sarah and I replied in unison, trying to keep the atmosphere light. Emma sat down with us, and for a moment, it almost felt like old times, but the conversation was stilted, filled with polite exchanges rather than genuine connection. After breakfast, I decided to have a one-on-one with James. I found him in his room, headphones on, completely engrossed in a game. "James," I called out, knocking on the doorframe. He pulled off his headphones and looked up. "Hey, Dad. What's up? Can we talk for a minute?" I asked, sitting down on his bed. "I noticed you've been spending a lot of time on your games lately." James shrugged. "It's just a way to escape, you know." "Get that," I said, "but I want to make sure you're okay. If you need to talk about anything, I'm here." He sighed. "It's just, everything's so messed up. Playing games is the only thing that makes me forget about it for a while." I nodded. "I understand. But maybe we can find other ways to cope too. How about we start going to the gym together? It might help to get out of the house and do something physical." "Yeah, maybe," he said, a hint of interest in his voice. "I'll think about it." Later that afternoon, I took a walk to clear my head. The weather was nice and the fresh air helped me think. As I walked, I bumped into Linda, Emma's sister, who was coming out of a grocery store. "John," she said, surprised. "How are you holding up?" I managed a small smile. "Hanging in there. It's been tough, but we're trying." Emma told me about the therapy and everything. Linda said, "I just wanted you to know that I'm here if you need anything." "Thanks, Linda," I said, appreciating her support. "It's good to know we have family we can count on." When I got back home, Emma was sitting on the porch, looking lost in thought. I sat down next to her, unsure of what to say. After a few moments of silence, she spoke up. "I miss us," she said quietly. "I miss what we had." "I do too," I admitted. "But things are different now. We have to accept that and figure out how to move forward." "Do you think we can ever get back to a good place?" she asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. "I don't know," I replied honestly. "But I do know that we need to focus on the kids and their well-being. Maybe, in time, we'll find a new balance." Emma nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I just want us to be happy again." As the weeks went on, we slowly started to adapt to our new normal. James and I began our gym routine, and it became a way for us to bond and talk about things that were bothering him. Sarah continued to excel in school, but she also started opening up more about her feelings. One evening, after our gym session, James and I were sitting on the porch, sipping water and cooling down. "Thanks for this, Dad," he said. "It helps, you know." "I'm glad," I replied. "It's important to find healthy ways to deal with stress." Do you think things will ever really get better? He asked, looking at me with hopeful eyes. I think so, I said. It'll take time, but we're getting there. One step at a time. In the midst of all the chaos and uncertainty, there were moments of clarity and connection that reminded me why I was fighting so hard to keep our family together. It wasn't perfect, and it never would be, but it was ours, and that was enough to keep me going. As we continued to navigate our new reality, I held on to the hope that we could rebuild, piece by piece. It was a long road ahead, but for the sake of Sarah and James, and even for Emma, I was determined to see it through. As summer approached, the days grew longer, and our new routines began to feel more settled. Despite the ongoing tension, there was a sense of gradual healing in our household. I realized that our journey wasn't about getting back to how things were, but finding a new path forward. One sunny afternoon, Sarah approached me with a tentative smile. "Dad, can we talk?" "Of course," I said, setting aside my work and giving her my full attention. "What's on your mind?" "I've been thinking about everything that's happened," she began, her eyes reflecting a mix of emotions. "I know it's been really hard on you, and I just wanted to say thank you for being so strong for James and me." I felt a lump form in my throat. "Sarah, you and James are my top priority. I'll always be here for you, no matter what." She nodded, then hesitated. "Do you think we should try family therapy again? Maybe it could help us, and Mom." Her suggestion surprised me. After our last attempt at therapy, I hadn't been eager to go back, but seeing the earnest hope in Sarah's eyes made me reconsider. "It's worth a shot," I said finally. "If you think it will help, we'll give it another try." A few days later, we found ourselves back in the therapist's office. This time, the atmosphere felt different. Maybe it was the passage of time, or perhaps we were all more open to the process. The therapist, Dr. Miller, greeted us warmly and invited us to sit down. "I'm glad to see you all here," Dr. Miller began. "Let's start by talking about what each of you hopes to achieve in these sessions." Emma spoke first, her voice trembling slightly. "I want to rebuild trust and find a way to be a family again." Sarah and James both nodded in agreement. When it was my turn, I took a deep breath. "I want us to heal, even if it means redefining what our family looks like." Said, "I want us to find a way to move forward together." For the next several weeks, we attended therapy sessions regularly. It wasn't easy, but we slowly started to peel back the layers of pain and mistrust. One evening after a particularly emotional session, Emma and I found ourselves alone in the living room. "Thank you for giving this another chance," she said softly. "I didn't do it just for you," I replied. "Did it for the kids and for myself. We all need to heal." She nodded, understanding the weight of my words. "I know, and I'm grateful." One Saturday morning, as we were getting ready to head out for a family hike, James came up to me, a serious look on his face. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Sure, buddy. What's up?" "Do you ever think about what life would be like if this hadn't happened?" he asked. I paused, considering his question. "Sometimes, but I try not to dwell on the what-ifs. We can't change the past, but we can choose how we move forward." James seemed to mull over my words. "Yeah, I guess you're right." On our hike, we laughed and shared stories, the tension easing with each step we took. It wasn't a perfect day, but it was a good one, and that was enough for me. As we reached a scenic overlook, Sarah turned to me with a smile. "Dad, can we take a family photo?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Sure, let's do it." We gathered together, and Emma set the timer on her phone before rushing to join us. The camera clicked, capturing a moment of unity amidst our fractured journey. That evening, as I reflected on the day's events, I realized something important. We weren't the same family we used to be, but we were still a family. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. If you found the story interesting, please subscribe to the channel, press the bell, and don't forget to give us a like. Thanks for watching. See you all soon.